everybody. Welcome to the PVD Horror Podcast. This is Dave. I'm joined here with my co-host, Brandon. And today we have the honor of having the special guest, Brian Yuzna, writer, director of cult horror classics like Society, Bride of Re-Animator, Beyond Re-Animator, Silent Night, Deadly Night 4, Returning the Living Dead 3, The Dentist 1 and 2, and so many more. Brian, thank you so much for joining us. This is such an honor on our end.
Nice to be here.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
If you like all things horror and want to get the best horror news, interviews, and reviews,
like, subscribe, and ring that bell to follow us and satisfy all your horror needs. Now, Brian, you were born in the Philippines and grew up in Puerto Rico and Panama. How was the transition for you moving to the United States?
Very, very confusing.
Yeah.
So you're right. I was born in the Philippines. My father was an engineer, a bridge and road engineer for the federal government. And so this was right after World War II. And the US was out there kind of bringing everybody into civilization, as they say. So they got to build bridges and stuff. So he was in the Philippines when I was born. My older brother had already been born in Nicaragua.
Okay.
And then after 2 or 3 years in the Philippines, then my dad and mom went back to Nicaragua. By then they had 4 kids and a Catholic family,
Yeah. Yep.
And then from Nicaragua, I think I spent a couple of years there in Managua. And then I moved to Panama. For all of my kind of kindergarten through 6th grade, I guess up to what you'd call middle school. Back then, we called it junior high.
Yeah.
It started in the 7th grade. So at the junior high, when I was I don't know what age that is these days, but when I was like going into, it was the middle of the 6th grade, we moved to Puerto Rico. And I went to middle school there. And then we moved to Atlanta, Georgia when I was 14, and I started high school as 9th grade in Atlanta. Now, this was the time of the civil rights stuff.
Okay.
I mean, this was Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
Yep.
This was Selma.
Yeah.
This was a very confusing thing for me, because I kind of thought I was an American.
Yeah.
Because my parents were Americans, although their parents were immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they grew up in a small town in northern Minnesota, right on the Canadian border. It gets cold as hell there. And then they were small town kids, and then they kind of lived somewhat around the world, in a few different countries, but they were Midwesterners. And when I went to school, we always lived in the country. We didn't get to live on the military base or in Panama in the canal zone. We didn't qualify for that. But we lived in just the regular town, the city. And so when I went to school, I went to an American curriculum. And so in October, we cut out maple leaves, and we had, the pita and the Santa Maria, and we did snowmen, and we did Halloween. We did at school. But when I went home, in the streets, all my friends, they were just Panamanians.
Yeah.
And we played soccer across the street. They all spoke Spanish, so I never took Spanish classes, but of course, you have to learn when you're a kid. In the streets, I was the gringo, right? Which is like not a good thing. I mean, I know you know, it's a funny thing, but I was the American, and they hated Americans.
Really?
And so, it was third world. So in the US in the 50s, TV had pretty much caught on. Where I grew up, we didn't have TV. I remember getting the first TV, a little black and white. And they had it for like 4 hours a day. You know, so I kind of grew up in a way, even a little older than I am.
Sure.
Because people my age, like if you're going to deal with horror movie people, you'd say the people it's kind of like Joe Dante and John Carpenter's. He's a little older than me. They're a little older than me. But I think Joe Dante's pretty close. Or, you know, Sam Raimi. Yeah. The people who made, you know, the kind of late 70s, early 80s, into the 80s movies. But I actually didn't share that experience of growing up in the US when, you know, for a lot of people, things were really good because, hey, you know, the war is over and who got the spoils?
Yeah.
But so when I came to the US, I thought, oh, finally.
Yeah.
I'm going back to my country, you know, I'm going back to where I'm from, you know?
Yeah.
And I must say, it just shocked the hell out of me. I mean, I went to Atlanta when it was, when I moved there, it was separate water fountains.
Yep.
Seriously, on the bus, it was colored to the back. There were kind of these barbecue restaurants or restaurants that had two doors and the kitchen in the middle. I mean, this was, and then there was the whole, I mean, this is what it was like pulling the whole society apart.
Yeah.
And I just realized, like, I thought, man, I have more in common. I think I have more in common with the Panamanians than these Georgians.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't, okay, in Panama, everybody in Latin America is pretty much, they're either Spanish and Black or Spanish and indigenous Central Americans, you know, like in Mexico.
Yep.
See, or they're Black, or they're, but the highest, of course, the Spanish are the highest, right?
Yeah.
But where I grew up, it wasn't quite so. It's like, I guess it's kind of like Brazil or something. It's all kind of mixed, but of course, still the lighter ones kind of have the best jobs usually, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's not racist or anything, and I don't.
No, but that's all.
Yeah, it was at the time.
It's just that you asked me what it was like moving for high school to the States. That was the biggest thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a big movie guy. This is just what was going on. But I'm probably the only guy that you know that has actually been to a KKK rally where they wore the hoods and they burned the crosses.
Oh, man.
My friend took me because his uncle was in the Klan.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, we watched. We weren't. But I mean, that's pretty weird, right? I mean, when we think of that, we think it's just.
It feels so far.
Weird history. You know what I mean?
We just so far away. You're right.
Out there, and this is something. Of course, now we're refighting those battles right now in this election. So anyway, I didn't mean to do that. You know what it was like? It was like going to the States where they had all the movies I wanted to see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I would walk downtown Atlanta, and because I was, from the time I was in middle school, well, when I grew up, kids ran around not very orderly fashion. When I was in middle school, my parents would let me go see 5 movies a weekend if I wanted, because I worked, so I had some money. in Atlanta, it was great because all of a sudden we had all the great, every big movie that I would read about was there.
Yeah.
And so that, and the movie theaters, there were these old kind of palaces that were just great, you know, just, I don't know if they even preserve those things, but they're kind of coming from the 30s and 40s. Big cities had them, you know. So that was, you know, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
That's cool. And so, yeah, just hearing the whole backstory, like I said, you know, from transitioning from, you know, a whole different country to the United States, yeah, you just kind of like thrown into a lot of stuff that you didn't even have any idea, especially like being a kid, you know. So it was just like you said, it was around that time, it was just all that stuff going on. So
Yeah, you know, I think we
crazy.
all have that experience.
Yeah.
All of us come from kind of a smaller kind of place.
Mhm.
And then as we grow up,
Yeah.
you know, we kind of get involved with other sort of parts of the culture or business society. So I don't think that this is, I think the experience of that, you know, it's kind of like my wife said, when we moved to LA, she's a small town, like a mill town, dirt road kid, right?
Yeah.
From the South. And she said it was a bigger shock to her to go to LA than it was when we moved to, like, you know, Spain or Rome. Because I made movies, I moved my family a lot. And so we lived in different countries. And for her, she said, you know, LA was like the hardest one.
Yeah, I hear some wild stories about LA.
I can see why, you know.
Yeah.
It's difficult. And for me, by the time I moved to the United States, I'd lived in 4 different countries already. You know. Yeah. But for her, she grew up in a little mill town.
Yeah.
You know, just to go to LA was like, wow.
Yeah.
What is this place?
Yep.
You know?
Now, you know, with your transitioning, everything coming back over there, growing up in those certain towns, you know, you were able to get like trades, you know, like you were a carpenter, you worked in restaurants. How did you end up becoming a filmmaker?
I think that, well, I was a big, I mean, of course, everybody says this, of course, because that's the only reason we're here together. We're all huge film fans, and so movie fans. Film was something the Europeans did at one point. But of course, I just loved movies, and especially because I didn't really have TV for real until maybe when I was in high school. Puerto Rico wasn't bad, but we didn't really, you know, movies was it. And I read a lot, and I loved weird stuff. The first thing I did when I was, God, I wasn't even in kindergarten. I don't think I got a nickel or something. I could buy a comic book, and I bought a horror comic book. You know, it's that EC Comics. Yeah. EC Comics wasn't the only horror comics. There was a lot of horror comics, and they just disturbed the hell out. They were just so weird, you know. And I liked weird stuff. I liked Mad Magazine. Yep. Because then I learned what satire was, and what irony was. How do you know that? And I loved it. I would read the horror comics. Of course, I got into the whole superhero thing. And we'd go to the movies on Sunday for the kids' matinee, and every now and again they'd put a horror movie out there, and that would just mess me up big time, you know. But then, of course, you learn to love it, kind of like a junkie, right?
Yeah.
First makes you sick, and then you chase the dragon.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great analogy right there.
Well, you know, it's kind of like you keep wishing a horror movie would do what it used to do to you.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, you keep going, oh, maybe this will, I don't know, you know.
So you just go out and make them, right? You make what you want.
Well, for me, I didn't grow up in any kind of world where it was, I couldn't imagine that you could actually have a job in movies or TV or anything, just because you're talking about before internet,
Yeah.
before YouTube, before cable. There were 3 channels on TV. Everybody watched one of the 3 every night.
Yep.
You went to the movies, but you didn't have, if you wanted to learn something, you had to go get a book. And today with YouTube and iPhones, and I mean, everybody makes movies. I mean, look at TikTok and Instagram and all this stuff. I mean, people are very, very kind of audiovisual narrative smart.
Yeah.
But when I was in the 60s, there was none of that. There was no, I mean, I couldn't imagine, what you'd make a living doing that. I had no idea what that looked like. Of course, out here in LA, I know many people who grew up here.
Yeah.
And they grew up knowing there's so many ways to work in the entertainment business because they were around it. Their uncle or their friends or their friends' parents or everybody's, here you can't throw a rock without hitting an actor at least, right?
You can try,
but not where I grew up.
Yeah.
And it was there was a big cataclysm happening in society with the generation I was a part of. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden we had this whole anti-war thing, whole break from the older generation. And then there was the whole hippie thing. And I just jumped right into it. And, they said the revolution was coming, so you might as well not prepare for the future. But you know what? It didn't come. But I had by that time dropped out, tuned in, and tune in, turn on, or I forget what it was, the Timothy Leary thing. In other words, take LSD and just go into the country.
Nah.
And so then I lived around amongst sort of the commune type of scene.
Yeah.
And but I always had to have a job because I wasn't really the best, the real hippie, the real cool hippies, they all had parents with money because you didn't work or anything. But I always had to have a job, which was kind of politically incorrect back then. And the kind of job I started early on when I'd get jobs, because I always worked, because my dad would always make me work from the time I was like 10 years old, with a job, not for him or anything. And I think at one point I had to get work, and so I went and got on a construction site, and then they make you dig ditches and stuff, and it really sucks. But you quickly learn that if you just go invest in a little nail belt and a hammer and a little T-square and a tape, you can say you're a carpenter's helper. And then you get paid a little more and you don't have to use the shovel anymore. And then it's, then you go, after you're doing that, you go, I'll just say I'm a carpenter. I can pound nails and use a skill saw. And at that time I had moved to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and they were just building a lot. And so I just went to work doing that, because that's the job you could get. Nobody told you what to do, or, and it's fun when you're young, you're building houses, you're crawling up on the, all out, throughout the winter and spring and summer. It's just fun to be outside and, and do physical kind of stuff.
Yeah, that ran in my family. My dad was a carpenter, and his father and his brothers and everything, but I can't do any of that shit. So
No, well, I have one grandfather that was from Sweden, Finland, and he used to say, Swedes are natural born carpenters. It's just in your blood.
Yeah.
But when you learn how to do it, I don't know, it's fun. If you're in your early 20s, you got energy out the wazoo. And you get paid, and really it's the kind of work that nobody really gives you a hard time about.
Yeah.
Except for your wife. Except for your wife. My mom would always complain, saying, my dad would always be working on everybody else's house, but except ours. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, he doesn't get paid for that. Yeah, that's the hardest. But it is great. I love doing that.
Yeah.
And I even started like taking on the taking on the contract of they're doing a suburb. And so you get these houses to do. Yeah. And what they do is they just bring you all the wood and they dump it. And they have like a slab poured, and you get the blueprint. And I would just get the hippies, and they'd be working barefoot and stuff. And we'd frame it. We wouldn't fit it. We would just frame it, and what they call, just, what do they call it? You wrap it in. You put the plywood on the roof and all the sheetrock on, not the sheetrock, but the insulation.
Okay.
The outside, so it's dried. It's the rain's not going to hurt it. Yeah. And then all the plumbers, electrician, all the other people come in. And then I even started going in with a friend of mine who was a lawyer, and where we would you'd get a little piece of land in the woods. North Carolina is kind of all woods, and we'd divide it up and put a little houses and sell it kind of on spec. So that was sort of, and then I was into art all the time. So I was painting paintings. I even had art shows, like painting shows, and sold paintings. And then cool. I had an art supply store. And then I was a partner in like a sandwich shop, and then the beer place where they have music. So I was just I would go in with somebody on Halloween, and they'd go up and buy a big truck full of pumpkins, take it down to Fort Lauderdale. We'd sell pumpkins, I wouldn't sell them, I'd just put up money. Same thing with Christmas trees. Yeah. So it was just a matter of doing anything you could.
So essentially you were a hustler. Yeah. Like anyway, you would just hustle. Like I need to make money.
I had so many jobs when I was younger, and I just never learned kind of how to. I just had a problem figuring out how to get along with the boss.
Oh, okay.
And so there's this whole kind of way that you just go, well, then I'll just do my own business.
Yeah.
If you can call that business. It's not really business. It's just like you're just taking what you got and taking your energy and see if you can make some more. Well, anyway, as that went on, at one point I started putting away a little bit of money. And at one point, I had a Nikon camera that I had bought from, he almost gave it to me. It was a real nice Nikon. And I had a darkroom. I was always into art. So I was always doing stuff with, art kind of stuff. And I would print my own, I had to, print pictures and do it kind of as an art thing. And I lent it back to the guy that sold it to me, and he traveled somewhere and it got stolen.
Oh, man.
And so it was quite a good camera, but he knew that I didn't really, he had sort of just kind of done me a favor.
Yeah.
So I couldn't get the money out of him. So what he did is he gave me this 16 millimeter Bolex camera. Now Bolex is a German motion picture camera company. I don't know if they do still cameras or not, but they were the go-to camera in, I guess, in the 60s and 70s for news crews, because in the TV news, they used to just have people sitting at a desk with these huge cameras on them. Well, then they invented videotape. Like it used to be, like in the 50s, those shows, and I got in this business at one time of selling old TV shows, but in the 50s, when they started broadcasting television, they had these huge cameras, and I think that these cameras would just go right to the broadcast. If you wanted to have a copy of that show at the early part, you had to take like a 16 millimeter camera and film the television.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's called kinescope.
Okay.
It doesn't look very good. It looks
Yeah.
sort of like a Man Ray painting. It's a bit solarized.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this was and so that's what they had to do. But then they invented videotape, and they had this 2-inch tape called quad. I think that's the earliest one. So this is hugely cumbersome. And so a news thing would be basically people reading the news or having a guest. Yeah. But as they developed videotape, they got down to where they started shooting on 16 millimeter and sending news people out to see the car wreck or whatever. And these Bolex cameras, you would wind them up. They didn't even need batteries. They had 3 lenses you could choose. And when you wound it up, and it would hold like about 100 feet of film or something. It'd be, I forget, like I don't know how many minutes it was. But it didn't have sound, so you have to do that separate. But anyway, he gave me this. Said, this is an exchange. And at that time, I lived out in the country, and I like on a river, and had lots of acres there. And I had a whole bunch of goats, and I had turkeys and stuff like that. And so I started shooting the goats and the turkeys. And I got a projector, and I'd watch this, and I thought, man, this is Bergman. This is because in the 60s, everything was French New Wave.
Okay, yeah.
Art stuff was the best, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But now I'm into the late 70s, and I'm got really into it. And so at one point I thought I'll make a short film. And so I had done that when I was early in high school on 8 millimeter, right? We'd run around and do silly things on film. But now I did a short film, and I found someone who had gone to film school. They didn't have film schools quite then. I think only like USC, UCLA, and NYU had actual film schools. Everybody else had radio, television, and motion picture departments. But I put an ad in the paper and asked for help, and the guy came. He says, I am on unemployment anyway. I just got out of school. And so we shot the short film, and we edited it, and we had to go rent. To get an editing machine, we had to go up to New York. We had to drive up to New York from Chapel Hill.
Oh my God.
And bring to Do Art Labs, which is a famous one back then, and come back, and we edited it. I put it together, went through the whole process. I was totally enamored of it. You know, starting out, I asked my friend, I said, I know the director says action, but what does the producer do? What is that? And he said, well, the producer's the boss, and he makes the most money. And I thought, well, that sounds like Me, I like being boss. I
That's what
like
I want to
making
be.
the most.
Yeah.
So, I'll do that part.
Yeah.
I didn't realize until later that the director gets all the credit.
Yeah, so your career actually you started producing films with your friend, director
Yeah.
Stuart Gordon. How did that friendship begin?
I after I made the amateur stuff, I was just so into it, and by then I was reading Weekly Variety and the Box Office Mat, and I just started wanting. I just thought, wow, this is much more fun than what I've been doing, and I loved everything I did, but I just thought, wow, this is really. I'd like to do this, but I want to do it like a business, so that not like this amateur thing. And so I put an ad in Variety, in Weekly Variety, and said horror movie director wanted. It was like about that big.
Yeah.
And I just got hundreds of letters. This is pre-fax.
Wow.
Hundreds of letters. And so then I went out to LA and just set up like 6 meetings a day. And everybody told me, don't go to LA. This old guy that had been there says, no, he says, hookers and thieves, hookers and thieves. And everybody has terrible things to say, about it. And I came out and I found everybody like me. It's like because back then you couldn't make movies where you lived. Today you can.
Yeah.
Today you can. It's a whole different landscape. The business is still LA, for movies, kind of.
Yeah.
But I just met a lot of people, and then I met someone who said, "Oh, you should meet Stuart Gordon." I went to Chicago. He had been a theater director for about 10 years. I mean, he was like, he was a professional,
Yeah.
He just hadn't made a movie. And I went to see his plays. He had a lot of success. A lot of people he dealt with were moving on up. And so he had the idea of doing a movie based on the Lovecraft's Re-Animator stories. And so we developed it into a feature, which is what I want. I borrowed a ton of money. I moved my family out to LA, and we kind of shot it between Thanksgiving and Christmas in 1984, I guess. Yeah.
Yep.
But anyway, I met him through a friend, and I think everybody's very surprised. I mean, Re-Animator was just a big success.
Yeah.
And I think because we weren't used to seeing a cheap horror movie, kind of a pedal to the metal kind of horror movie, cheap, with a new director, be that good. But the thing is he really wasn't a new director. This guy had been directing for 10 years.
Yeah.
And he's a horror fan, and he liked to shock people.
Right.
So, I mean, it kind of made it special. And then that gave me kind of an in to try to make a living making movies.
Sure. So, your first directorial debut was Society, right? That, I mean, Re-Animator, obviously, that's like a surprising that a film of that nature is such a success, but like Society, what an introduction to Brian Yuzna. Like, that is such off the walls film, and it has such a cult following today. And I've read that it's also going to be getting a novelization coming out soon.
We just finished it. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
that's amazing. I have to ask, like, when Society came out, what was the response like? How did people receive that?
It was terrible. I mean, not everywhere.
Yeah.
In the US, I mean, even my friends were, you can tell when people are sort of indulging you. Oh, that's really good. It's it didn't work here, which was a shock to me, because while I was making it, I thought this is going to be #1 in the theaters when it comes out. Everybody's going to love this. But of course, my taste is only shared by a very very small section of the public, but then in the UK, it was kind of successful and very well received. And in France and Italy and Spain, it got like a theatrical release. I mean, here it got like almost nothing. And
I think it's because they have more sophisticated tastes over there.
I don't know if that's the case. I think to a certain degree, there's kind of an awkwardness of first time directing and stuff in it.
Sure.
And I think when in this country, they maybe saw it that way, whereas in Europe, it's sort of an American thing. Kind of like when we watch Japanese horror movies and you go, that's not logical. And they say, no, it's Japanese.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same thing that happened when the society got kind of discovered in this country. It was another almost generation. And they looked at it and they'd go, well, that's kind of stupid. They say, it's the 80s. That's and so they forgive. But on the other hand, I mean, the movie is sort of based on the payoff. And you either go for it or you don't.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I love it. I loved doing it. And it just fit what I liked. I always liked the surrealist stuff. I like, kind of satiric, ironic, stuff on the edge.
Yeah.
So it was certainly, it certainly represented what I wanted to see on screen.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No, that was a really great movie. I had stumbled across that movie when I was younger. I would, like I told Dave before, and like a lot of people that listen, I would watch these films with my grandmother, and that was one of her favorite movies, so it was kind of cool.
Your grandmother?
Yeah. So and then just being able to watch Joe Bob with her, and then that was on one of the Joe Bob specials, and so being able to sit there and watch these films,
I guess it's good to have an older person who will watch horror with you.
Oh yeah, that's how I got hooked onto it, so that's how I stumbled onto a lot of your films, so so it was cool. So in 1989 you had gone and done Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. It was a bigger budget film than, other films that you worked on. And you definitely you stepped out your comfort zone of horror and just, making a kids film for Disney. What did you learn from that project?
Well, I think I think what I learned is that I didn't have the tools to negotiate the big time.
Yeah.
Not that I don't have the smarts or the talent or anything. It's not that. It's just that I was woefully inadequate. Well, Stuart and I. It was it was like a Shark Tank. And it was, it's a whole different world than when you're doing the independent stuff. But I did see how, I went through the whole process, and there's part of it is just wonderful. It would be great to be one of the, to be a kind of filmmaker that can work within that kind of incredibly intense, moneyed, pressurized, system. Some can do it. I mean, look at, hey, John Carpenter created some of our great stuff. He could never quite get there, I mean, it's like, what is it? Memoirs of an Invisible Man, maybe it's, I mean, even something like Big Trouble in Little China is a kind of indie, it's kind of a medium level. Joe Dante, Joe Dante was able to make big movies. He was able to go from The Howling and into doing, and Gremlins. It's a big movie. Toy Soldiers. He was able to do that. Sam Raimi went from Evil Dead and Darkman, up to A Perfect Plan and Spider-Man, for Christ's sakes. So some people can do it, and some people get there, like Spielberg or Lucas, that generation, people hit it big. Or what's the name of the guy? Christopher Nolan.
Okay. Right? Yep.
There's some people that are the greatest. Maybe is what's his name? Terminator. Who's the director of Terminator and the
we're gonna catch it. We're gonna get some heat for this.
You'll have to edit that further.
Yeah.
What's his name? He just did the Pandora movie.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's James Cameron, right?
James Cameron.
Yeah.
I mean, he almost does. I think he's the indie guy who created his own big time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, he kind of just rides over the system. He makes the biggest stuff totally the way he wants to do it. He's a big, probably horrible dictator working. But, he did Terminator, and that's pretty good for no money.
Yeah.
And he I mean, come on, this Pandora, is it called Pandora?
The Avatar movie is
the Avatar stuff. I couldn't believe the last one that came out, because I thought, the first one, we had to see it because it had shit you'd never seen before.
Yeah,
exactly.
Technologically.
Yeah.
But I don't know about blue people and stuff. I'm not, it's not my thing, right? But there was fantastic stuff. I get it.
Yeah.
And then when this was coming out, I'm going, I don't know, man. He can't do that again, because digital has just gone too far beyond. And then that water one he did, Jesus, it was pretty fucking good.
Yeah.
I mean, my God, that underwater stuff and I mean, geez.
It was amazing. Yeah.
You just have to like give them the credit, man.
Yep.
Not many. I mean, I don't even think Spielberg. I mean, Spielberg is great. He did Jaws and all this stuff, but his movies, they all seem to be kind of Hollywood movies anymore. I mean, I don't even know the last time I went to one of them. Lucas, he burned out. Scorsese is just insufferable with his movies now, to me. There's so much pretension in my book. Coppola, he just quit after a while, right?
Yeah.
Because he couldn't recapture what it was, what that edge was that he was riding on,
Yeah.
I think they're like skateboarders that just can't quite ride that rail again. You know what I mean? They're just, But Cameron, I think he does. I don't know. Anyway, that's beside the point. Anyway, I did get a taste of it. It's, I guess it's like getting up into the big leagues,
Yeah.
we kind of didn't get a follow-up, and you got to keep making a living.
Yeah.
And, eventually I went to Spain. I felt like I was going to NBA Europe.
NBA Europe.
It's like you can't make it in LA, you better
Yeah.
go to Europe.
Yeah.
Now, you worked on Empire Films for a few years. We had Charles Band on the show, and he talked about a lot of filmmaking and stuff, like how his brother was over there. You also did the Beyond. How was it working with Charles?
I really liked it until I had to sue him because he's, let's say, ethically challenged.
No, okay.
So, I mean, I gave him Re-Animator to sell, and it was hugely successful. And yet all those millions of dollars somehow didn't trickle to me.
Oh, man.
So I had to have a big lawsuit and everything just to get the movie back. So anyway, I've got mixed feelings about him. I say if he wants to hire you, he won't pay you much, but why not, right? But if you're thinking about going into business with him, I caution.
Okay.
But back when I met him, I loved what he was doing. I met his dad first, Albert. And then I met Charlie. And that was some of the earliest sets that I ever visited when I first came out to LA. And I think I visited a set that his father was producing. It was called Sword Kill. And it was about a samurai swordsman who is frozen in an iceberg or something. And it melts, and he somehow ends up in LA with he's a samurai in LA. And then I remember being on the set of Charlie's movie. It was kind of a Terminator movie. I think somebody had read the Terminator script, but it was called, and Charlie directed it. I'm trying to remember. You remember his early Empire stuff?
Yeah, he had a bunch of films. He talked about it when he was on there, but yeah, I'm not sure which one that was kind of like the Terminator film.
It was about the guy. They have to go back in time to kill the father of the son, or so. It was very much Terminator, but it was good. I mean, it was, I think, one of his better movies that he directed. And I visited the set of Ghoulies, which he produced. Okay, yeah. And I had and at that time I was working with him in a way because I wanted to make a movie. So I went to him because when I met his father and then him, I'd met a lot of other people, but I liked what he was doing.
Okay.
I liked those. I just liked the exploitation movies and the, just that pure fun kind of genre movie.
Yeah.
And he was distributing directly through Wizard Video, which was his company. Yeah. VHS tapes. Back then, anybody could do it. Anybody. You could sell right to the stores, but you had to know what you were doing. Well, Charlie and Rick, his brother, Rick Band, the composer, they grew up with their dad in Rome, Italy. And so in a way, Charlie he's kind of an expat like I am.
Yeah.
I'm an American that kind of grew up overseas.
Sure.
He's an American that grew up overseas. And there's a certain mentality there. He was into movies from the very beginning because his dad directed. I think his dad directed, is it I Spit on Your Grave? Or
oh, okay.
He did Dracula's Dog, I know that.
Yeah.
And he did these Hercules movies across Italy to, is in Serbia or Croatia where they shot those Steve Reeves Hercules movies. And I remember I had seen a Hercules movie. I think it was called, on TV when I was in high school. It was called Hercules and I don't know, the underground or the, Hades or something, Forbidden City or something. And Charlie was a kid. He played I think he played Hercules' son or something. So his dad was in the business, right?
Yeah.
And he started making movies really early on. I remember in the early 70s, the early 80s, when before I ever thought about getting into it, but I'd go to the movies. And I always try to go to the matinees if I could, because nobody would be in there. It'd be kind of like your own screen. That was like where I saw Phantasm the first time, which I just thought was incredible. Right,
that's a classic.
I know it's clunky and everything, but come on.
Yeah, it's classic.
You got to give it up to Don Coscarelli.
Yeah.
Yep.
He's original. And I remember seeing this, I guess it was kind of a horrible movie. It might have been 3D with these cars. It was called something of Jared's Sin or something. And that was a Charlie Band movie. And I think I also saw one of it. He did these softcore porn movies. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Alice in something land or something. So Charlie was making movies, before I thought about it.
Yeah.
And he grew up in that business. And he's always been kind of a little ahead of the curve with, he can't make a movie with a SAG actor anymore because he doesn't pay residuals. So, and his movies get cheaper and cheaper, but then don't they, right? Mm-hmm. But I do think that I used to help him with covering his payroll, because he would come up short. He's always had kind of cash flow problems, but he had all these receivables with his video sales. In other words, he would deliver all these videos to the distributor or the store, and then they would have to pay within 45 days or whatever. You give it to them, then they pay 45, 60 days or whatever it is. And so, but he would come up short with paying his crew. And at one point, I helped him a few times. I would take these receivables and find people to buy them at a discount. And then you would have the money go direct to them. And they would put up the money. So I'm very familiar with Charlie. And if he had played it straight on Re-Animator, shoot, I'd still be working with him.
Yeah.
I like what he does. I think he's an original, he's an original.
That's for sure.
Now, how do you feel, with your son, Logan, following your footsteps, being a filmmaker? What is some advice that you give him over the years from things that you learned in your own career? Well,
he's on a totally different track than me, of course, because he's working in animation.
Okay.
So he did the YouTube thing, right? And he's a skateboarder, right? So he started by doing skate videos, which is a whole genre in itself, which I very well know because my son-in-law is actually a pro skater.
Okay.
So I know that world. I would never do it because you can get hurt.
Yeah.
But my son Logan, he really got into that, and he's one of those kids. He just would get on YouTube and do tutorials, and he could just spend 8 hours doing beats, editing stuff. You know what I mean? I was the kind of guy that I'd like to find a good composer and talk to him about doing those beats. And I want to have my editor and work with him. I never had the desire to either get behind, do the camera, do the music, do the editing. I just wanted to make the show.
Yeah.
So that's he likes all the pieces. You know, I always feel there's somebody that can do it better than me. You know what I mean? I think there's always, you know, somebody that maybe could bring something to the table.
Yeah.
And so Logan, he did tons of these videos. And then I'm trying to figure out how he got into animation, but he started working at Marvel he was working on, I don't, what was it, the Avengers, and then it was Spider-Man when they started that show.
Yeah.
And they were, I guess they're a terrible company, and he worked for DreamWorks and then Nickelodeon, which he liked the best.
Yeah.
But then he went to Spain he lives in Madrid now and with his family. And he works for Skydance. Skydance is like it's a huge entertainment company, right? I think they do some of the biggest movies. And but they started animation, and the production part of it, they bought a animation production company in Madrid, Spain. And then they hired John Lasseter after he got Me Too'd, remember? John Lasseter, your audience doesn't know, it was Pixar. He's the guy that directed Toy Story.
Oh, boy.
He's the guy that with his group, they did all those great Pixar movies. And the crazy thing is probably a lot of your audience didn't even see Toy Story when it first came out because they were too young.
Right? Probably.
But it's impossible to explain what a big movie that was.
Yeah.
And how Pixar recreated what animated features were. I mean, it's the biggest thing since the original Disney features from the 40s and 50s. I mean, this was a big thing. But Lasseter kind of got into a Me Too problem and got dumped. At one point, after Disney bought Pixar, he ran both Pixar and Disney Animation. All of a sudden, he's out, and as I understand it, and so Skydance hires them to run their studio, their animation studio.
Okay.
But the production part of it is in Madrid, and Logan, he went to middle school and high school in Barcelona because I was living there then. So he's sort of also kind of an expat in the sense that I guess he always felt like he wanted to go back to Spain, because that's kind of where he grew up.
Yeah.
And then he did marry a woman from Barcelona here. She had come here, and they have a kid. And so they've been there for 3 years now. But it's interesting because, animation, that's not a bad business.
Yeah. It's huge right now. I mean, everything's animation, it feels like.
I mean, a lot of those Marvel superhero movies are animated movies, just very sophisticated. But animation I mean, if you look at the Japanese style anime, if you've ever seen that, you can do so much with animation.
Yeah.
Now, we love all your films. You've worked on like a handful of sequels that, sometimes like I grew up, didn't even know like you were a part of until I got a little bit older. And one that always stuck out to me was Return of the Living Dead 3. Like how did you get involved with these projects, that already had a whole, set with directors and actors? How did you get involved with like these sequels?
Well, I have 4 kids,
Yeah.
and that means you've always got to work. So I don't really have the option of saying no.
Okay.
But also, I always would see a sequel. I don't know. I guess I never really thought, I just thought about making movies, and that ultimately, if it was I always kind of liked the idea of doing a sequel to something that I liked.
Mm.
You know, it's something that if it was a movie, although I can't say that I particularly liked Silent Night, Deadly Night, and I did do 2 sequels.
Okay.
So I guess that gives lie to the whole thing.
People have grown to love those installments though of the franchise. That has really
so
taken off.
It just goes to show you, because I think when I was doing those, you know, I was working with Zeph Daniel, who back then was known as Woody Keith, who wrote or co-wrote Society and Bride of Re-Animator and Silent Night 4, and Screaming Mad George, who was my go-to guy, because we just shared, I think with him and Zeph, in different ways, we just overlapped wavelengths, you know.
Mm.
But we absolutely went bananas. I mean, we were out of control a lot of the time. And we were just chasing the dragon. I mean, we were, it's not like to a certain degree, we had such weird ideas we were trying to deal with, that I don't know if we were very realistic at all. And so those movies were crazy. And but I think after 20 years goes by or something, like I said, I think people look at it, they don't look at it like they look at it as a curio or something.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like watching The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari or Nosferatu. You're seeing something that is so old that I guess somehow, I don't know if you forgive it or if you just pay attention to the more unique qualities.
Sure. I think that has a lot to do with it. You know, watching these films now, people are able to kind of recognize, and people like quirky and like over the top stuff. I think more and more, like, people are seeking out films that I feel, you know, previously they might have overlooked or dismissed, but they want a different kind of experience these days. So I think that's a lot to do with why we're seeing this resurgence of films like Silent Night, Deadly Night 4, which is just absolutely bonkers.
It's too crazy. I mean, there's a whole podcast just in that.
Yeah.
That movie is out of control.
It really is.
Silent Night 3, I think, is, I mean, not Silent Night, the Return of the Living Dead 3, that's different. I think that movie really works.
Yeah.
Isn't crazy. It fits. I really feel like if it had gotten a good push theatrically, it would have worked. I think it could have sold. There's a problem in that it's not, I think when people go see it, and when it came out, and it was Return of the Living Dead, they expect a different movie. They expect a punk kind of funny movie.
Yeah.
Yep. And we didn't do that. And that was because I thought that we were I was very serious about the idea that I was making the second sequel to the unauthorized sequel to the iconic movie that is the beginning of the modern age of horror.
Yeah.
So I would say that Night of the Living Dead is when horror took a corner.
Sure.
When it, and I think the era we are in is still kind of the vestiges of that, Night of the Living Dead. George Romero made a sequel with Dario Argento called Dawn of the Dead. But John Russo, who wrote the original, wasn't invited to work on that, as I understand. And he owned the rights to Living Dead. That's why it wasn't Dawn of the Living Dead, it was Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah.
It was Day of the Dead.
Yeah.
John Russo was always trying to make a movie called Return of the Living Dead. I know that because I actually read a paperback book that he wrote called Return of the Living Dead that the story had nothing to do with the ultimate movie, except it had the gas, I think. So if you'll remember George Romero's movie, it never explains how people change, how they become reanimated or become living dead. They indicate on the radio or TV or something that some satellite came back or something from space and might have brought something. In the it always looked to me like if you got bitten, you got brought back, but that really wasn't the case. It's just that when you died, you came back. In Dawn of the Dead, the tagline on the poster was, "When hell is full, the dead will walk the earth," which I think, I don't know, I'd put that right up in my top 10 taglines of all.
Yeah.
I mean, my God.
Yeah.
That's my idea of a zombie movie.
Yeah.
It's not about you've got AIDS or you've got a virus, all that kind of crap. It's macabre.
Yeah.
It's beyond that.
Absolutely.
It's that, hey, hell is frozen over.
Yeah.
The dead are going to walk the earth. That's the apocalypse.
Yeah.
But anyway, when finally, I think John Russo made a deal. I've never talked to him about this. I have met him, but he's not like a friend of mine. So I'm just, don't hold me accountable. But the guy who ended up with the rights to Living Dead, I think it was a guy named Joe Wolf. And so I presume that John Russo made the deal with him. And then Joe Wolf hired Dan O'Bannon, who had famously written Alien.
Okay.
I mean, that's pretty big.
Yeah.
And Dan O'Bannon worked on, God, was it John Carpenter's Dark Star? The USC project.
Okay.
And my friend Bob Greenberg, the guy who introduced me to Stuart Gordon, worked on that movie. And Dark Star is a whole lot like Alien in the sense that it's outer space. I mean, it's a student film. It's pretty cheap. It's outer space, but the guys running the spaceship, they're not like 2001. It's not Space Odyssey. They're like a bunch of truckers.
Yeah.
Complaining about their pay and about the food. And we hadn't seen that before. And that's what Alien kind of did.
Yeah.
Besides the fact that Dan O'Bannon brought in H.R. Giger's artwork and created something that for me was the first time I'd seen anything that I thought was actually alien in the movies.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'm trying to remember what Dan O'Bannon did after Alien, but he got the job to do Return of the Living Dead, and he incredibly actually took an EC horror comic and put it up on screen.
Yeah. That's
did.
a great way to look at it.
Nobody could do. They tried Creep Show. Everybody thought that to do a comic book, you did like the Batman TV show.
Yeah.
You had owls come out. You had primary colors. Or on Creep Show, you did a comic book, and then you did a frame, and then you went into the frame, and or you did what was the Batman that they did in the 70s with Jack Nicholson playing the Riddler, Jokers. You know, they do everything like cartoony. Well, Dan O'Bannon knew better than that. He did Return of the Living Dead like it really was a EC comic.
Yeah.
And after that, of course, then, you know, Joel Silver said, hey, I can do a whole TV show of this. And he made Tales from the Crypt. He figured everybody saw how you do that. But Dan, I think, is the guy who did it. And he made an incredible movie that was both just a real horror movie, a fun satire, a total comic book.
Yeah.
I mean, the best zombies, the Tar Man. I mean, come on, this is a whole different level.
Yeah.
You know, a whole different level of Linnea Quigley. Come on. And the scene in the morgue autopsy thing, how, I mean,
it's an absolute
eating brains only happens in horror comic books.
Yes.
I mean, it's
totally absolute favorite in the zombie franchise for so many of the horror fans. And I mean, those films definitely kind of changed, I think, the game for a lot of films that followed them. Brian, we appreciate this time so much. This was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was great. And I love that you're such a straight shooter too. Like, that is such a desirable quality. So yeah, thank you. And for sharing everything that you have tonight. We really appreciate you.
Adios.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Brian Yuzna, everybody. If you don't know him, then I don't know where you've been. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody, and have a great night.
Okay, thanks for having me. Bye-bye.